Comrade Molly, Jacob here, Free Swazi Movement hot seat. Maswati, lana ku hot seat, sinilethela bantu laba yendile lemvles yendako, bazama ukukhipha amakhosetive, badasifundisa tifundvo, basitshela okay, lana sihambe kabi, yini lesingayenda lana kulesikhathi lesibiso. Namhla sinilethela Comrade Bhabhalazi Bulunga lo South Africa. Lo sebenze nabo Comrade IB, 3 ANC. Babe Bhabhalazi njengoba ngishilo Comrade Bhabhalazi Bulunga usebenzile wayilwa ipolitiki yaseSwatini. Comrade Bhabhalazi, siyabonga ukuthi namuhla uthathe lesikhathi lesi ukuthi usijoyine ube ku studio. Ngicela ubingelele eMaswati Comrade Bhabhalazi.
Ngiyanibingelela nabakagogo. Ligama lami Bhabhalazi, not Bhabhalaza.
Bhabhalazi. Yes.
Bhabhalazi. Ngibe student ngekhona eSwatini from 1979 ngaqeda 1984 ngisikhuluma ke lokunengi experience yami yase ekwaluseni as a student leader, and also I was active in the ANC.
Siyabonga Comrade Bhabhalazi. I got that right. I got that right. Ngiyaxolisa Comrade. Okay, vele siyabonga ukuthi namhla uDr. Ashe sithathe lesikhathi sakho ukukhuluma ngeletimve etendeka eSwatini. Ngidawuqala ngembuto lo wekuqala nje ukuthi asisitshele ngawe ukuthi uhlangana njani neSwatini. What is the link between you and Swazi? Utithola kanjani useSwatini?
The connection is deep in the sense that I did get married. I got a wife from the university. I got a degree at the same year. The personal picture is that as a child, my parents migrated from Magudu in South Africa. We were living in a farm. We were basically uprooted, told to pack our things. My parents, I think I was 5 years old when they migrated. Instead of going to other places in South Africa, they went to Swaziland. So I grew up at Escaweni. I went to Ponjwane School, Evikzijula, until the whole of the secondary school. I finished in Manzini at Salesian. I did my Form 4 and Form 5 at Salesian. And when I finished 1977, I went to work in South Africa. And after working in South Africa not long, I was then recruited to the ANC in 1979 when I went to the university. So it's the ANC that organized my scholarship and everything else to get into the University of Swaziland. So that's how I'm linked to Swaziland.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, thank you so much for sharing that. Because it's the ANC who actually sponsored you to go and study in Swaziland. Why would the ANC sponsor you to go and study in Swaziland, at the University of Swaziland?
They facilitated my scholarship and going to the university. Because I was familiar with Swaziland, having been recruited, it was easy for the struggle to operate with people who know the place and can easily get into the parts of South Africa, which was then called Natal. working with all the comrades that were responsible for the Natal machinery.
Right. That's very interesting. So it was a strategic move for the ANC.
Yes.
You were basically a very important tool. That's why they sponsored you.
Important cadre.
Important cadre. What do you mean by important cadre? Could you clarify that for us?
It's not a tool, but a cadre. In other words, it's almost a soldier.
Oh, so they sponsored you. Okay, that's perfect. So anyway, I think they sponsored you to. It was a strategic move, isn't it? For during that time, it was. How did you feel about that? Did you want to do that? Why did you agree to that sponsorship? Why did you take part? Why did you join? Why did you say yes?
Why I said yes is because when you look at my life, how we had suffered as a family, it was a trigger that as a child I did not know politics. My parents didn't involve in politics, but they suffered the political oppression of South Africa. That's the reason they ended up running away from South Africa to Swaziland, where also my grandmother in particular didn't want me to grow up and work for the African farmers, because that's what the route for all the children growing up would have ended up working for the farm, working in the farms in South Africa. And we were just at that point. That's when then my grandmother decided and that we should move as far away as possible from possibility of us ending up not going to school, but ending up working in the farms.
Right.
Because the environment one grew up, so when given the politics, it made sense at that time. Also, as a young person, when given good outline of life and the issues and the challenges that are faced by the nation, it's easier as a young person to join, in a sense that you have got the energy, you have no fear of what could happen to you. I think as a young man joining the ANC, I had wanted to be a soldier.
Right.
So going to university was a bit of a letdown for me, because I really wanted to go straight to Angola and be trained. I was told by the people who recruited me that they are looking for educated soldiers. So I think after a month, I got to adjust, and then I went to university and then got very, very, very involved with ANC work while at university.
Right, that's where I wanted us to go to. Which is so tell us about your experience at the University of Swaziland, and you can go ahead.
I think the experience was varied. We were more focused to the struggle in Africa, and it was a policy of the ANC that the ANC doesn't get involved with the internal politics of the host country. So it was very, very sort of like strict on that score. But I guess as a student, at some point we didn't sort of make a difference. When you're in a student body meeting discussing an issue, you couldn't say, and then I'm going to walk out of the student body meeting because now they're talking about the internal
Swaziland.
issues of Swaziland. So you end up mixing things up and getting friends. But we were very clear that our target was not the host country. Also, for me, it was a time when we grew up, when King Sopuza was the king, and in a different style of ruling, and I had a lot of respect for him. even though when now I analyze some of the policies that he made, I may criticize, but my respect for him was still remains, because I look at, he was a member of the ANC, he hosted the ANC. I think it will be wrong to be on a hindsight. You then criticize when you look at the reality of the times. He did everything to protect not only his country, but also the refugees running away from South Africa. Lots of South Africans survived because they went to Swaziland.
Oh, interesting. That's very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. Because
as a student body, we stood up against the changes that happened after the king passed away. There was a Likoko that took over and began to change things. That was the first sort of time the student took to the streets to protest against the Likoko's actions.
And were you part of those people who took part in the protest against Makoko? Were you part of those who went and to protest against Makoko?
It was mainly the students, and my experience, because I was the SRC president in my sort of last year of university, and the protest, the people that I admired in the main, I won't name individuals, but the people I admired most were the women at the university. They were the ones that were in the forefront. I think most men could run faster and this and that, and therefore there were fewer in the forefront. And there were also, most of the male students were a bit conservative.
Right.
They sort of like identified with what the royal family is doing without looking at politics as such.
Okay, right. We're going to move on to one of the questions that I have for you. Your involvement with ANC, the MK Underground. Do you want to touch on that, or just briefly? Obviously, you know, some stuff you're not going to talk about. Be very smart. The MK. What does MK stand for? It's Umkhonto weSizwe.
Umkhonto weSizwe, yes. I was not trained as a cadre of Umkhonto weSizwe because I was sent to go to school, but I did work for the ANC and with the ANC, and some of them were MK. I think there's always the unmandated disclosures of people that were in the MK to say what they did. I think most of the people have sort of like respected the ANC and said, we did what we could when we can do it. There are things that one can talk to. You can't hide the fact that I was involved in assisting comrades sometimes when they needed accommodation, and assisted comrades when they were arrested. And because as a student, and also I could move around the country because I spoke Siswati, and not as good as it could be, but I could go around better than most South Africans around the country. So yeah, there was a lot of logistic issues that we got involved in, and respecting the laws of the country. Remember that under Sopuza, we all respected the king and the government thereof. And also the other experiences were that many times we were stopped by police as NC people, either carrying people going to Mozambique or coming back. The soldiers and police were not all the same. There were those that in other words, where you could sympathize and empathize with your cause, and at some point they will tell you, just run away from here. Balega, yabona.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
even
yeah.
when we were demonstrating as students in Babane, at some point there was a police commissioner that told us to run away. So so you sort of find that abantu abafani, they were within the police, within the soldiers. There were people that accommodated us, protected
Right.
us, but there were others that were obviously working with the Boers.
Right. We're going to come to that one. We're going to come because it's a very interesting one. I'm going to ask you, thank you for answering the question. I'm going to ask you another question. So the 1982 Pretoria Accord between South Africa and Swaziland, and the proposed land deal with King Sobhuza II, Ingwavuma and Gangwane government. Tell us a bit about that, the 1982 Pretoria Accord between South Africa and Swaziland. Do you remember what happened?
Yeah, I think the ANC was opposed to any land deal or anyone to deal with the apartheid government regarding the borders of Swaziland, because we regarded the apartheid government as a legitimate government. It had no right to sell or incorporate or cede land to anyone, and was going to be a problem when we are in power to deal with the neighboring countries who had been given land by the apartheid government. So in fact, we opposed it. But there was a lot of good diplomatic engagement with the Swazi government on this matter. Also with Gangwane, we were at an advantage that the Gangwane homeland leader was opposed to the land being ceded to Swaziland at the time. I think looking at the power and the rudeness of the apartheid government, King Sobhuza did a lot diplomatically to protect the country from the Boers, because Swaziland was less sort of like bombed or suffered like Mozambique, suffered like Zambia. It was due to how Sobhuza handled the diplomatic with the animal, which is the apartheid government.
Right. So
in the Ingwavuma area, it was also by coincidence that the homeland leader there, which was Gachab Telezi, he was also opposed to the incorporation of Ingwavuma to Swaziland. And therefore, the Boers had a problem in that not only we were saying no, it was also its own internal structures, the homeland leaders on both sides of Swaziland, on the side of KZN and on the side of Mpumalanga.
Right. All right. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I know you've spoken a bit about your life as an MK underground in Swaziland in the 1980s, and we've touched on that one. So we're going to move to the next question, which is very, very interesting. Your abduction from Swaziland. Who took you? Who abducted you from Swaziland, and how and why did they do that? And what was the outcome of that abduction? That's where, I'm interested in that a lot, and I think the viewers will be.
I had found a job in Big Bend on finishing the university in 1984. I think I worked for 3 months, and then I was called by the police station to come and report, and then they locked me up, and I was then interrogated by, I think, the security service of Swaziland and some senior people. The one I remember was a commissioner called Madolo he was based in Stegi. They interrogated me about my whereabouts, my membership of the ANC, and my citizenship, and all that. I was not abducted from Swaziland. I was arrested and I was handed over to the Afrikaners police at the Oshuk border post. Literally by police, not some mysterious individual. It was the Swazi police that took me I was taken from Big Bend to Mbabane, from Mbabane to Oshuk. And when we arrived at Oshuk, I tried to resist and refuse to voluntarily walk. And then they took me, they bound me behind the bakkie, and they drove with me on. I think there were about 4 police or 7 of them that were holding me down. In fact, when we arrived at the South African side and they handed me over to the Boers did not want to take me because they had not been briefed as to what is happening until they were told that this is ANC guy. After they said it's ANC guy, no questions was asked. They took me into a detention center there at the Oshuk. I stayed there for a week before I was moved to Newcastle, which is KZN head office for the security branch of the South African police. So that's what happened to me. I was handed over to the South African police by the Swazi police, basically the government. And what saved me, which is your next question.
Yeah. Before we get into that one, I want to go back to what you said, because you have so much respect for Sobhuza. But then, kule incident lena, do you think because if the police, the government of Swaziland, backed and they hand you over to the Boers, and you still had that, it seems like you still have that respect for Sobhuza, perhaps if you compare him with Makosi Dive, the son. What makes you still have that respect for when the government handed you over to and how did they even find out who's when umbani? Like, why did they go for you? I think it's
I think it was the student activities that alerted or rather brought attention to me in particular as a foreign student, because that's what they used when they arrested me. Remember that at that time, 84, King Sobhuza had already passed away. Okay. And therefore, Likoko was in charge. And it was the same year that we had demonstrations against Likoko as students. So as a university, we have made the university very radical and very political. So there was therefore expected that the security forces will not be, or the politicians will not be liking who we are, and if they could find any reason to arrest or deport us, they would do so. It was
and then they grab you, and then they take you, they hand you over to a Mabunu. Yes. Yes. Was Madolo still there? I think you said you only recall the police had swung Madolo. How did they interrogate you? How did they treat you? Do you want to get into that?
Basically, the interrogation wasn't bad. It wasn't like South African interrogation. They were just asking me questions. who we are, where are my parents, but the questioning was trying to prove that I was not a Swazi, and therefore I was in Swaziland illegally, because that's what they said to the UN. So when they took me over, it was the police from Mbabane, because my in-laws, they campaigned a lot, including the students. Comrades like Abomandla Mhlatshwayo, they did a lot to campaign that I shouldn't be taken back to South Africa, but be deported elsewhere. Like most of the South African comrades that were arrested in the same year, and they were taken to Mozambique, and I was amongst those that were handed over to the Boers. I don't know what happened to the other people that we were with at Oshuk. There were MK people that we were with. We didn't share names because of security, but they were there. They were, I think I was the only one in my cell. In the other cells, there were about 5 or 10 people. They were all South Africans. I think they suffered the same fate as myself.
Right. And you have no recollection, or you don't know where they are today. We cannot get a hold of them. You haven't been contacted.
I don't know, because when I was there that I've been handed, I thought the Boers will kill me. So I think all of those guys may have been killed. I may have survived because of the noise that was made, heavy noise made by both the ANC and the student body in Gwaluseni, led by Mandla Mhlatshwayo. They made a lot of noise in the sense of protest. The university, in fact, was shut down that year as a result of the protest against them handing me the police handing me over to the South African police.
So you mentioned Mandla Mhlatshwayo. What was your relationship with Mandla Mhlatshwayo? You've mentioned Mandla Mhlatshwayo, you've mentioned the United Nations, and Gusi wasinza because of the noise that was made. And can you touch a bit again, what's the link? United Nations, Mandla Mhlatshwayo, and you survived because of the noise that they made.
The students sort of like put a very, very, very effective campaign, not only protesting against the Swazi government, but also lobbying the United Nations, because the Swazi government had not followed all the agreed protocols when you take a political refugee and you send him back to the country of origin. That's against all the protocols in the United Nations. So that's how the United Nations was brought in. Also, the ANC itself did campaign a lot using all the diplomatic links with the United Nations and other countries, because it was a bad tendency whereby political refugees are taken back to their country of origin. I think they made a mistake, those who did it in terms of the Swazi side. They did not think that there is United Nations and there is a protocol that protects the refugees by all countries. So that's how the United Nations got involved. So there were multiple sort of people that were involved. My own wife and her family, they had gone throughout the government of Swaziland asking if I could be released or be sent to other countries other than South Africa. But I think the minister then of police, I'm not sure whether he was minister or he was commissioner of police, Majaji Smelane, they met him asking that I deported to either Mozambique or Tanzania, but not be sent in South Africa.
Right. So where were you finally sent? You said you were sent back to South Africa, but what in South Africa, and then what happened next?
So as I said, I was sort of born in Hluhluwe, and my mother was living in Hluhluwe. And when I was taken from Oshuk, they took me to Newcastle. So in Newcastle, I stayed, I think, 3 months until December. They released me, I think, on the one day before Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went home to my mother in Hluhluwe.
Right. Okay. Yes, yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that. So it seems like the Swazi people, the Swazi government that has no respect for organizations like my United Nations or anything.
Yeah.
So it traces back because there's one of the commanders, they've actually abducted one Swazi in South Africa. I think he was a refugee, and bambisela usestokisini njengoba sikhuluma eSwatini bambita commander ngiyakhohlwa igama semkhohliwe. So eSwatini kune habit yokuthi banga respect human rights abananzaba nje nokuthi bendala bakufuna, from what I'm gathering, and the level yaqhubeka.
I think, yeah. And also then, if they abduct somebody from South Africa, it's also a violation of the South African Constitution and the law of South Africa. And I'm sort of like surprised that our government has not taken issue with the Swazi government for doing that, because it's not allowed. No government can sort of come to another territory and arrest somebody and take them back home. It's sort of like unheard of. I'm surprised if that happened and our government is quiet about it.
Yeah, that recently happened. There's a Inyanga called Dr. Mkulu who abducted 2 comrades from South Africa to Swaziland through angathi babafashise kuphi nosibafike kanjani. So level le habit lena imlendekayo. So mawucabanga wena, what can Swazis do kule issue lena yalabana abathethwe eSouth Africa refugees bawashushumbisa bawamikisa basestokisini njengoba khuluma makhosi TV yabashaya every day. What do you think Swazis can do to fight this thing so that batobabisela emuva eSouth Africa, because bama refugees and babu exile eSouth Africa?
I think in South Africa, there are many things that can be done. One of them is to mobilize going to the South African courts, because government can be taken to court for not protecting the refugees that they are in our control jurisdiction. And as a result, if there's all sort of like the evidence that they may require, the government will be forced by our courts to call for those people to come back or be returned to South Africa, because they had run away because they were being persecuted in the countries. So government cannot then not look after those people and ensure that they are safe in South Africa. We even, not take people back to countries where they may be hanged, where there is a sort of like the law where it's still applicable to hang people. So I think Swaziland still has that law to hang people. So when people are involved in politics, they are highly likely that they may end up being hanged in Swaziland. And if they are abducted from South Africa, it's a double sort of crime, both for the South African government and the Swazi government.
Right. Yeah, because we do have an incident like that. Like I said, we've got 2 who've been abducted. So thank you so much for the advice, Leo. Because asati ukuthi sendeni ngoba makhosetive wenda la khangago eSwatini uthatha bamvu because according to the law you're not supposed to do that. Thank you for giving us the advice, Leo. So tell me a bit about how I know you mentioned that your wife's family, your in-laws, they also helped you. Like and to stop you just a bit about your wife's background and how she helped you save your life.
How it saved my life?
Yeah, how your wife helped you.
Okay. She was in the ANC also, so she's the one that would raise the alarm with the details where I was arrested at Bombo Ranches in the first place, and secondly, the parents were going with her to meet the ministers that were concerned with the law and order, and also she was liaising with the comrades like Abomanda as to the details as to where they are, where I am. How it helped me survive the South African killing machine was the fact that once the UN got the report and the protestation, it became difficult for the South African government either to prosecute me and be arrested, because the matters how I was arrested would come up that the Swazi government handed me over. And the Swazi government will have a problem with the United Nations and the African Union that they are taking refugees back to the apartheid government. So in a sense, that's sort of like, that's how I think I survived.
Right.
Had the students and my family did absolutely nothing, I don't think I would have survived. They would have done what they've done to other people that they were killed, and we cannot find them as to where they are today. So by sort of like highlighting the issue, it was almost out there in public, and therefore the Swazi government was going to be in big trouble internationally if the South Africans went ahead and did as they please. And therefore, in that big space, I was lucky. I survived.
Wow, that's incredible. That's awesome. So yeah, that is really, it's the power of media. We always try and tell them with media during the unrest Eswatini simbonile makhosetive nasikhanyiso bacima i-internet because baphethe MTN baphethe yonke info, so they know ukuthi once media i-powerful kanganani, even nanyalo bangena babulala ema Facebook pages, but basenda ema scams, a lot of things to try and destroy and to stop information from coming out of the country, so that the United Nations and all the other, the African Union, all the unions know what's going on in Eswatini. Thank you so much. So Maswatini yativela ukuthi imedia imqoka kanganani ukuthi ni unite nibange lo msindo kumqoka lembo leyo, because comrade Bhabhalazi ngakekho namhla ngasikhuluma naye namhla if makwakakhe nabomandla hlatshwako ma students ase University of Swaziland did not make the noise and bashaya incingo bakhulume the United Nations. So sifunza sifumvo lana Maswati ukuthi ningabotifihla tinfo nyalo sine social media nabo bonke kude lenite bona. Yes, kunebambu labasawuthi okay batawuhlazeka, but ungalicabanga ihlazo makhosetive aka-expose, sichubeke sim-expose, not only ukuthi sim-expose but sichubeke siphushe njengoba asashilo comrade Bhabhalazi ukuthi lento leyenteke kukhomanda ukuthi bamthathe eSwatini bamshushumbise. It's 2 governments that are involved. I-government yase South Africa kude likwendile so far yendiwe i-campaign bayile bo-comrade ID, I think not long ago, we all for a petition to try and speak to the South African government ukuthi okay kunomuntu wethu lothethwe ngalokungekho emthethweni. So it's just to highlight those things. So comrade Bhabhalazi, I'm just going to move on to the next question. So what's the role? What do you think South Africa should do, the government of South Africa should play in ensuring democracy Eswatini? Because these are our neighbors. And when I saw so khulumile ukuthi South Africa isebenzile ne-ANC isebenzile kakhulu neSwatini. So what do you think the government should do to help us attain democracy in Swaziland?
I think it was government in South Africa is bound by respecting the sovereignty of other nations. Having said that, it is important that the democratic forces in Swaziland, they ensure that in things like abduction are highlighted to the South African government using all possible routes that the South African government should be taking. The other part is the fact that South African government must be put into sport in that the South African government has a constitution that guarantees its citizens. They cannot therefore say anything about the neighbor who is eating people, so to say. So there is a way that they should be pushed. They must be lobbied. The South African government must be lobbied so that they take decision. For instance, South African government does not recognize Morocco. We don't have diplomatic relationship with Morocco because Morocco is still a colonizer of the South Sahara. So South African government can be mobilized or be lobbied up to a point of saying they cannot recognize the current regime in Swaziland because it's undemocratic. There's a need of lobbying the South African political bodies. In other words, the South African parliament must be, because there are parliamentarians in Swaziland that are arrested, the South African parliament cannot keep quiet about the violation. For instance, if you look at the journalists in big countries, if Swaziland were to arrest a journalist from the Western world, all journalists all over the world are going to rise against the government that has done so. So the same thing with parliament. When a government that is a neighbor arrests parliamentarians, the South African parliament should be protesting against the Swazi government for doing so and pushing our government to ensure that the rule of law is maintained instead of oppressive laws. So there are various things that the democratic forces in Swaziland needs to have a thorough package of things to do so that you mobilize governments as well as structures within government like parliament, that there should be things that could be done. Lobby the government of South Africa all over. There should be nothing that is not lobbied, including the trading that is done with Mswati from South Africa.
Right.
And I'm sure they get petrol for his cars from South Africa. They get the parts to manage those cars from South Africa. And therefore, South Africa should not be an accessory to his oppressive regime. So there's a lot that the democratic forces should do politically to mobilize.
Unfortunately, we haven't seen South Africa support Mswati the way that we expected them to do. And that's a very, very sad thing. We share a lot with South Africa, and to see them, we had Ramaphosa. When this thing started, President Ramaphosa was part of the SADC. I think Begapeti SADC. They did visit Swaziland, and nothing actually came out from that up to today. So that's a very, very sad situation. And we've seen South Africa do the same thing with Zimbabwe. So I'm not quite too sure why South Africa does not help neighboring countries to attain either peace or democracy. We're going to move on to the next question. Thank you so much for answering the question. So as an activist, I think, were you an activist at the University of Swaziland? Could you share to Maswati, my students, especially the University of Swat, could you address them and encourage them? Because banding labalwabo, labasema universities, labase university as a Swatini. So could you share your experiences as a student that we could learn as my students and the youth in Swaziland, please?
It's difficult for a grandfather to say to a grandchild, this is what I did and therefore you must do it. But what I could say is that what assisted me in particular was getting political education. Because without political education, you end up being a radical that could work for anybody who recruits you. So for the students, my source of activity was political consciousness, in that I was conscious that I'm oppressed by the South African government, and therefore I needed, or rather I joined the ANC, and the ANC gave me the political education that I needed most, that guided me, my actions and everything that I did, even when as a student. So it is important that the young people, they do get good, one is correct history of their country. The second is political education that is neutral to different T-shirts of political parties. So that when somebody is involved in politics as a young person, he has got the grasp and context of the politics of the country.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for that advice. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the way forward. Do you have anything that you could, what's the way forward? I'm not quite too sure whether you've been actually following what's been happening in Swaziland. I know you mentioned with if members of parliament were arrested, the South African government should actually get involved, because we've got Baqede, Namthandeni, and Kauzela, who's here in the United Kingdom, and the two are still in prison. Baqede and Namthandeni were arrested. These are members of parliament. So do you think that, what's the way forward? What do you think Swazi should do right now? We're seeing a lot of problems. We're encountering a lot of problems with unity. Aguna unity, the parties that are there, they have issues with EU. They don't understand unity. Do you think unity is important? Could you elaborate on unity and all the stuff I've mentioned? I've said a lot of stuff. So.
I think what probably I'm not close to all the documents that the democratic organizations are doing in Swaziland that much, but I think what helps is for them to paint a picture of what does a democratic Swaziland looks like. In other words, in South Africa, we had the Freedom Charter that was drawn almost 68 years ago, or 67 years ago, 1955. The Freedom Charter for us painted the end game for South Africa, that we want a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. So it pointed all the way. It didn't matter which political party is there. This is what, as South Africans, we were striving for. To a point that today, the constitution in South Africa embodies the Freedom Charter, which is endorsed by all political parties. So there is a need for a rallying call for what a free Swaziland will look like. And I think the other part is that the campaign for democracy is weak, in that the regime can democratize anytime and open elections and open for people to campaign, and still retain the powers. So it's not enough to say we want democracy. Also, the comrades must learn from the countries that have gone before them. Look at what democracy can be and what is it that it should be mixed with. In other words, if you just want democracy, it's an easy thing for a monarch to give. I think why it has not given for now is the fact that the people have not risen to be a threat. But once it reaches that, it's an easy thing for him to give and stay. So that's why I'm saying they need to relook the demand for democracy. Ngoba le democracy mayingenamshibo lipolishi.
Lipolishi just starch.
Yebo.
It's not balanced. That's a balanced meal.
Awufuni ukuthi athi utakuniketa le polish nemazambane asichibo yabona. So it's just going to be like that. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to go into what a free Swaziland will look like.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you so much.
It's not enough just to say Makosetive, and also they should not personalize it to. You see, once you personalize politics, you cut short of what you will achieve. The ANC did not personalize the struggle to white people. It fought the political system that must go.
So, sorry, what do you mean by not personalize it? Because obviously we've got the royal family.
Mswati is a person. He may die tomorrow, but the royal family system will remain. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It should not be personalized. It must be a system that you don't want, and you fight that system to be removed, and you should know what will replace the system. Right. To say it's democracy. Democracy has got 1 million definitions. And therefore, it may not be what the poor people are looking for. And also, I would say that the examples around Africa and the world are plenty for the democratic forces to learn from.
Right. So what do you think about the government of national unity? I know government of national. I know South Africa formed it, Nelson Mandela, but I'm not quite too sure how they did it. Because Eswatini is a kingdom.
It's a transition. Government of national unity is a transition structure, allowing the country to go through and circle to the final point. And therefore, it's not even something you can sort of debate that much.
Siyabonga Maswati, siyabonga. Maswati, don't forget to share and to comment. And siyabonga comrade Bhabhalazi Bulunga uthatha isikhathi sakho ube nathi namuhla. Good night, good morning, good evening. Molly Jacob here, Free Swazi Movement Hot Seat. Thank you.